Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Maggie. I'm a second year med student and a former professional MCAT tutor, and I run this business with my brother John. So if you're watching this video right now, then you're probably having some trouble with cars, and I totally understand that because I also started out having a lot of trouble with cars when I was studying for the MCAT myself. I actually just pulled up my old sheet where I used to keep track of what I made on different practice exams and stuff, and where I kept track of my progress, which I haven't looked at in years. So it's kind of crazy, but I started at a 123 in cars and I ended up scoring a 130 on the real exam. So I am not naturally a whiz at cars, and it took a lot of work just to get that 7-point increase. It was hours and hours and hours of work and tons of practice passages. But if you want to know how I actually break down a cars passage, I took my thought process and I kind of put it into steps, and I actually uploaded that into a YouTube video a few months ago. It's called "This is how I do cars," or "This is how you do cars," or something. So definitely go give that a watch. But I got a lot of comments after that video saying we want to see you do this with a real passage, blah, blah, blah. Which I will say, I try to always go through that same algorithm with every cars passage. So if you go back on any of our playlist of the AAMC sample test or the FLE 5, the free exam, I try to follow that process and verbalize what I'm doing at the same time in every single one of those breakdowns. But I give the people what they want. I'm going to do it today with a AAMC free practice exam, the cars passage 6. And that is the scored exam. So this both serves as an example of what I was talking about a few videos back of how I go through cars passages, and as a continuation of the sample test breakdowns that I feel like this channel is kind of known for. So without further ado, let's get into it. AAMC, the scored free practice exam, cars passage number 6. So the first thing that I said that I do when I'm going through a cars passage is first I scroll down and I look and see if there's a title, and there actually happens to be a title for this one. It says Employee Control and Occupational Stress. So that's actually pretty good. We actually may glean some information from that title. Then I go up and I'm going to start reading the passage. Essentially, I'm going to read the first sentence. Occupational stress has been recognized as one of the most significant workplace health hazards for employees in the United States and other developed countries. So boom, we know from the title and from the first sentence that this is going to be about occupational stress. And it seems like this author is already setting up an opinion about it by saying that it's a workplace health hazard. Or that's kind of a fact that they're putting forth, and they may choose an opinion to side with that argument or to kind of be no, that's actually not true. But regardless, we have set up a framework from which to add onto our main idea. We have set up this framework that this passage is going to be about occupational stress. Let's figure out how the author feels about it. What are they talking about occupational stress? What are some of the arguments that using to back this claim up? So let's keep going. I'm going to read through the whole first paragraph, and I'm just going to be conglomerating it in my brain. In the short term, stress can lead to emotional distress, stomach disorder, headaches, sleeplessness, and loss of energy. In the long term, it can contribute to serious illness and even premature death, most likely due to cardiovascular disease. Occupational stress causes U.S. businesses more than $150 billion per year because of absence, lost productivity, and health costs. Furthermore, occupational stress seems to be endemic to the modern workplace, as surveys have shown that a large proportion of workers report feeling highly stressed at work. I know it's been a while since I've read out loud because I'm fumbling over my words. Okay, so what have we added on? Our initial main idea was basically just the first sentence, basically just saying that occupational stress is a huge health hazard for U.S. businesses. So we have some evidence that says that it causes illnesses, it can even cause premature death, it is a cost on the U.S. businesses, and that it is endemic to the modern workplace, at least in the U.S. population. I think that's what the author's paying attention to. So it sounds like we're starting to form what the author's opinion is. Sounds like they agree that occupational stress is a huge health hazard. They've added a ton of kind of evidence, what the MCAT likes to call evidence. So now I'm going to it seems that we've reached kind of the end of an idea here, so I'm going to kind of sum up this paragraph in my head. I'm not going to write it down. Writing it down is a waste of time in my opinion. So here I'm going to say occupational stress is a workplace health hazard because of illness and cost to the company. I may even put in there occupational stress is an endemic workplace health hazard because of illness and cost to the company. But you see how it's a sentence? That's important. It's not just an idea floating in my head. It is a sentence. And technically, if the MCAT wanted to ask a question about this and put the main idea as one of the answer choices, which they do all the time, they could put what I just said, that sentence, as an answer choice. And that would be your correct answer choice because that's the main idea so far. Let's keep going. There are a number of workplace factors called job stressors that make jobs stressful. Some stressors concern the nature of the job and job tasks. For example, jobs with heavy workloads requiring long periods of attention, and jobs that are highly repetitive and boring will likely be perceived as stressful. Other stressors concern interpersonal relationships at work, such as conflicts with coworkers or abusive behavior by superiors. Finally, there are stressors in the organizational context, such as having insufficient resources to do the job or unfair payment systems. So this is another idea. Now we're talking about the specific job stressors. It talks about the types of jobs that are more stressful. It talks about conflicts with coworkers and superiors being stressful. And it talks about insufficient resources to be stressful. So because this is a whole different idea, and I'm to the end of that paragraph, I'm going to add this idea into what was my working main idea. So before I said occupational stress was an endemic workplace health hazard because of illnesses and cost to the company. Now I need to add in some of what these stressors actually are. So now I'm actually going to change it up and I'm going to say boring jobs, conflicts at work, and insufficient resources. That is replacing occupational stress here, because that's what is the occupational stress, right? But it's just more specific. So boring jobs, conflicts, and insufficient resources is a health hazard, causing illness and cost to the company. That's where we're at. Moving on. One of the most important factors in determining the level of occupational stress experience is the perception of control. Control can be over any aspect of work, including location, scheduling, and how tasks are done. Jobs differ tremendously in the amount and type of control they allow employees. At one extreme is factory work, in which the employees must work at precisely determined times, performing specified tasks at intervals determined by a machine. At the other extreme are high-level management positions in which tasks can be done at any place, anytime, and almost any manner employees see fit. So this paragraph is actually adding on to this paragraph. Can y'all see that? Because this is talking about job stressors, and then this says this is the most important job stressor, perception of control. And then it just gives a bunch of examples. So that's very important. I have a feeling like whenever they take an idea and then zoom in on one part of it and then make a whole paragraph out of that, that's important. So now that makes these stressors sound like not as important for the main idea. So now I'm going to say job stressors. I'm just lumping those together because I remember they're all in this paragraph. If I need to come back and find out what the stressors are, I can. But I'm going to say job stressors, especially lack of control, is a workplace health hazard causing illness and loss of cost to the company. But you guys should be able to recognize that this is an important paragraph right here. And also, if you'll remember, employee control is literally in the title. So obviously it's a very important argument that the author is trying to make. It should be highlighted in our main idea. Okay, moving on. Throughout the workday, employees experience and perceive conditions and events, most of which are typically benign and paid little attention. Certain events, however, are perceived and interpreted as somehow threatening to physical or psychological well-being. These are the perceived job stressors. The stressors result in negative emotional reactions, perhaps most commonly anger or anxiety. These emotions lead to strains, both behaviors and physical conditions associated with stress. Perceived control is an important element at all stages of this process. So, I don't know, to me this just sounds like a supporting paragraph. It sounds like it's kind of adding on to the prior two paragraphs. So I'm not gonna change my main idea. Moving on, job stressors can include anything that a person finds threatening, including the amount of work and work demands, constraints that interfere with work or prevent employees from getting their work done, interpersonal conflicts among employees, and uncertainty about tasks. Behavioral strains consist of actions people take to cope with stressors and associated emotions. They can be constructive acts that successfully deal with stressors or acts that are destructive to the individual and the employer. Physical strains are related to both the fatigue of hard work and the physiology of negative emotion. Both kinds of physical strains can increase physiological arousal, resulting in elevated blood pressure and heart rate, as well as secretion of so-called stress hormones such as adrenaline into the bloodstream. In the short term, such physiological changes can result in minor physical symptoms such as headache or upset stomach. Chronic elevation of heart rate and blood pressure can contribute to more serious health conditions and ultimately heart disease in some individuals. So this is a weird paragraph to me because it sounds like they're just defining a bunch of terms. They're defining job stressors, which I felt like they had already defined, but whatever. They're defining behavioral strains, which this is a new definition, so we may want to pay attention to it. It's actions that people take to cope with the stressors. They talk about the physical strains, which they touched on a little bit. So they talked about actual muscle fatigue or whatever. And then they talk about the physiology of negative emotion and these stress hormones that can get released. And then it kind of went back into how these cause health conditions. So this sounds like something that the author really wants to highlight in their main idea. As far as like incorporating this paragraph into my main idea, I actually feel like my main idea is still fine. I may say something at the end like, if I was saying job stressors, especially lack of control, is a health hazard causing illness and cost to the company and can be offset with behavioral strains or something, since that was a new definition. But what I am going to pay attention to is the fact that they went back to this whole like health concerned thing. Like that's just a ton of like paragraph space to be talking about the specifics of the physical manifestations of this occupational stress. That's just going in the back of my head. I'm not really changing my main idea, actually, like the words, but it's going in the back of my head. Like that is a very strongly supported argument. Okay, last paragraph, tiny. Compared with individuals who perceive that they have low control, individuals who perceive that they have high control will be less likely to interpret the environment as stressful, will have lower negative emotional responses, and will exhibit less strain. So this goes back to this idea that I said was so important about how the perception of control is one of the most important factors in determining the level of occupational stress. So I'm doing the same thing as I did with the last paragraph. I'm not changing the wording of my main idea, but in my head, I'm like, oh, that's like the most important thing to take from this main idea. Like it's the main idea of the main idea, if that makes sense. So then the last thing I do is I go back up, and this makes more sense when I'm not reading it in a YouTube video like this. I'm going back up and I'm reading the first sentence again. Occupational stress has been recognized as one of the most significant workplace health hazards for employees in the United States and other developed countries. I just do that. I don't know. It's a little like cue to me. So now I'm to the end of this paragraph. This will be where I stop and I formulate a main idea in a sentence form if I hadn't already done that. Since I've already done that with you guys on the camera, I will not belabor it anymore. Let's go straight into the questions because this video is already getting long. Number 1, which is number 33 in the practice exam. Based on the passage, an employee's heavy smoking could be considered to be. So an employee is heavy smoking. Why is this related to this thing that was about occupational stress? Well, heavy smoking could lead to all these health conditions that they cause, or that they talk about in the passage. It doesn't have anything to do with like the job. So I'm thinking that maybe that they're trying to key me into one of those like definitions that they were talking about in this like next to last paragraph. And I'm saying that because this is like a argument kind of question. It's not a main idea question. So is it A, an occupational stressor for the smoker? No, right? That no one's making you smoke for your job. Where's that job? Is that on Indeed? So no, it's not an occupational stressor. B, a buffer between control and stress. So I'm not quite sure what they mean by a buffer between control and stress. Like I know in my head what that would mean, but I'm not sure as far as the passage goes what that means. I'm imagining that they're saying that the employee is smoking to kind of compensate for the stress that they're experiencing. And while that's true, while that may be true, I don't have really passage information to back that up, so I'll just put a little maybe beside it. C says a destructive behavioral strain. Now, what is the behavioral strain again? We actually had that in our main idea, even though I'm kind of wondering if I should put it in my main idea or not. Behavioral strain consists of actions people take to cope with stressors and the associated emotions. Can be constructive or they can be destructive. So that actually is more in line with what I thought B was saying, but I actually have passage evidence to back that one up. And then D, a constructive coping behavior. No, right, smoking is not constructive. Next question, based on information in the passage, one could predict that which of the following people would experience the least amount of stress. So, right, what was the most important factor in stress in the passage, right? That control, perception of control. So who would be the least stressed? The person who has the most control. So A, a business person whose partner has taken charge of all major decisions. Is that in control? No. Even though like that seems like a good setup to me. But no, that's not someone who's in control. B, a soldier whose daily routine is tightly structured and controlled by superiors. Definitely not, right? Like that's like the factory worker. C, a chronically ill patient whose physician makes all the decisions about the patient's treatment. No control there. D, an athlete whose coach expects input from the team players on which play or strategy to employ. Yes, right? That's the whole thing, is that one is the one that has control. Next question, based on the information in the passage, one can infer that employees who perceive that they have high level of control over their work environment will be happy, right? They should be better off. A, more likely to engage in constructive acts that successfully deal with stressors. They shouldn't have as many stressors, right? I mean, maybe, that seems like a positive thing, but it's not really exactly the connection I was trying to make. I was just trying to say that they don't have as much stress. B, less likely to interpret events in their workplace as threatening to their well-being. Yes, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like They were saying this occupational stress is all about these perceived threats, and that a high level of control can decrease your occupational stress. And so by deductive reasoning or whatever, we know that that probably means that they're going to be less likely to interpret their events in their workplace to be threatening. C, more likely to experience stressors related to the organizational context of their job. No, right? Less likely to experience stressors. Less likely to be in high-level management positions. So the high-level management positions, if y'all will remember, was actually something that the author was saying was good because there's a lot of control in that situation. Next question, which of the following, if true, most weakens the author's view regarding the process of occupational stress? So these questions, the most weakens, most strengthens, whatever, these are main idea questions almost always. And this one is too, regarding the process of occupational stress. That's what the whole passage was about, right? What is occupational stress? How do people get it? How do people avoid it? That's the whole thing. So basically we're saying which one is the complete opposite of what the passage said. A, high-level management employees consistently report experiencing higher levels of occupational stress than do factory workers. Okay, yeah, right? That's not what the author was saying. The author was saying that the high-level management employees actually have less stress because they have more control over their schedule than the factory workers. So that definitely would weaken it. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it because I just don't want this video to go too long. B, occupational stress actually costs U.S. businesses more than $300 billion per year because of absences, lost productivity, and health costs. So the way that this is saying the same thing that the passage was, it's just saying more money is cost. So that actually strengthens the author's argument that occupational stress is a big deal. So no. C, employees often interpret events as threatening to their well-being when in fact their well-being was never actually threatened. Threatening, I don't think that the author was ever saying that these people were literally threatened, yes, their well-being was probably never actually threatened, but it's that perceived threat that is important to this stress response. So it doesn't really matter if their well-being was, I think this is completely off to the side. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't strengthen or weaken what the author was saying. And it's definitely not it's definitely more of an argument-centric kind of answer choice, whereas this one was literally the main idea, but in reverse. D, job stresses in the organizational context of a company create much more occupational stress than do interpersonal relationships at work. These were mentioned in the same paragraph, I think, the organizational context and the interpersonal relationships. Or it might have been different paragraphs, but regardless, both of them were just seen as job stressors. Not the major job stressor, because that was the lack of control, right? But they were both just job stressors, it didn't really matter. So A is correct right there. Next question, which of the following claims regarding the negative outcomes of occupational stress is best supported by evidence in the passage? Occupational stress causes U.S. businesses $150 billion per year. This is one of those questions that's which one has the most evidence? And this is where I honestly recommend going back up in line counting if you can't remember. Whichever one of these ideas has the most sentences, literally, the most lines dedicated to explaining what they're talking about, then that's the one that is the most supported by evidence based on MCAT terminology. So that's going to be B. Look how much time they spent talking about that. They talked about the specific illnesses that it caused up here. They talked about it more down here and the physiology of what's happening. So that is definitely more backed by evidence, supported by evidence than any of these. Next question, an example of an employee's perceived threat to psychological well-being, and it actually gives us a paragraph. Suggested by the passage is... So when it says a paragraph, I like to go back up and read the paragraph again because usually that means that they're going to be really specific about some definition or some BS kind of detail. So I'm going to see what they said about psychological well-being in paragraph 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Psychological well-being. Okay, they're looking for an example of an employee's perceived threat to psychological well-being. So this is probably going to be something that is interpreted as threatening and result in negative emotional reactions like anger and anxiety. So A, missing days of work without reason. That doesn't sound like a threat. That sounds like a good time to me. B, working at a physically challenging job. So, okay, we have to pay attention that they said psychological here because you could get tripped up on B. But that would be a threat to the physical well-being, right? I know it's a very ticky thing, but when you see C, then you're going to understand what I'm saying. C is having an argument with a coworker. This is more psychological, right? This was one of those stressors that they even talked about, the interpersonal conflict. So that's going to be a threat to your psychological well-being. D, purposely doing work slowly or incorrectly. That is not a perceived threat to the employee. That is a perceived threat to the employer, I guess. Anyway, that's going to be C. The key to that one is psychological, not physical. So there you have it, folks. That's how you do a CARS passage. I really can't say it enough, guys. Like, this takes so much practice. This took so much practice to be able to like break down a passage like this. But it's actually super kind of, I don't know, like empowering almost when you can. And it makes you feel so much more in control of your CARS score. And you're gonna, like, my CARS score was like this. It was just like, are the passages like interesting to me or not? And that would kind of like dictate what score I was getting on these passages. But once I started to be able to go through it like an algorithm like this, I started to consistently score higher. And that consistency is what is key and is what's going to have you lower your anxiety on your actual test day, because you're like, I've been scoring this score on my CARS. I know that if I do the same thing, I'm gonna get the same result. And honestly, like, I encourage you to like go through it just like I've done now. You don't even have to time it for this. Like, you need to be doing a bunch of timed passages, but go through it untimed. Try to talk out loud. Teach another person as if you're teaching another person about the passage that you're reading as you're reading it. Like, that other person has a really low attention span. I gotta like get down to the exact nitty gritty of like what this like author is saying. I just need the main idea, that's it. And that's what I need to be telling my friend over here. But if you're like me, my friend's my cat. But she would listen to me. Anyway, get this method of going through CARS passages down and then do 10 practice passages a day. If you're really bad at CARS, do 10 practice passages a day. Like, from the very beginning of your MCAT prep, just read and just get like main ideas. Like, you don't even have to be doing questions, especially at the beginning. Like, just get a bunch of passages under your belt. And then you can buy the CARS Q packs, whatever, you can do the questions, but you'll understand what you're doing and getting main ideas out of your passages. And you won't just be guessing or feeling like these questions are asking like esoteric, subjective kind of stuff. They're really not. Like, I thought that too when I was first going through CARS. I was like, these questions are so stupid, like blah, blah, blah. They're really not that bad once you kind of get... I'm not a AAMC sympathizer, but they're not that bad when you kind of understand what they're going for. And it's main idea every time.
Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you loved it or you hated it in the comments. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.